going to go with the script here. Her name is, you've already seen her in action here, Wendy Bredhold. For the last 8 years, she has led the Sierra Club's Beyond Coal campaign in Indiana and Kentucky. She's a 1998 USI grad with a bachelor's degree in sociology and communications/journalism. Before joining the Sierra Club, she worked as a writer in the USI News office for 10 years and wrote for newspapers and magazines. She also served on the Evansville City Council, representing the 3rd Ward, and was an organizer with Mom's Clean Air Force, program of the Environmental Defense Fund. She's a member of the 2012 class of Vice President Al Gore's Climate Reality Corps and serves on the boards of the USI Center for Communal Studies and the Under the Beams music series in New Harmony. On Monday, coming Monday, she starts a new job with the Audubon Society, leading their transmission initiative in 7 states. Good start. Yeah. Let's welcome Wendy Bredhold.
Thank you, Dr. Dowdy. I really appreciated your anecdote because I certainly had a similar feeling every time I drove to the campus for 10 years. When I worked here, my mood would often depend on what I saw coming out of the smokestacks of the A.B. Brown coal plant on that day. And I'm happy to tell you that something has been done, and that coal plant is retiring at the end of this year. So that time period and what I was learning about the area where we lived is a lot about why I do what I do today. It's very much about where we live, and I'm going to get more into that. But I understand that the College of Liberal Arts has issued a challenge to students, an invitation to take part in a variety of challenges, and one of them is reducing your carbon footprint. And I'm going to challenge you to approach that idea in a couple of different ways, both in terms of your own individual carbon footprint, but also in terms of engaging with reducing fossil fuels in our electric systems, and even perhaps, and I hope, looking at the university's carbon footprint, if you're so moved. My environmental activism started right here on this campus. That's me selling Earth Day t-shirts for the Student Environmental Action Council at USI. Earth Day 1990, you can tell by the puffy shirt and the big hoop earrings, and the fact that there aren't any robots running around campus like I saw when I came today. And then later, 20 years later, in fact, when I was a USI staff member, I was part of the Environmental Stewardship Committee, which was chaired by Dr. Paul Das. Now, I don't think this Environmental Stewardship Committee is active anymore, and I don't believe there has been a student environmental organization on campus for many years. Is that correct? Can anyone correct me on that? Do you have a student environmental organization? Okay. Well, that might be a great way, if any of you are so moved, to engage the university in some programs that I'm going to talk about a little bit later. This is what I hope that you get from the talk today. I hope that you come away understanding that Indiana is a very significant place to do climate work. I hope you feel hopeful after learning about the progress that's already been made by the Sierra Club and other organizations in terms of a clean energy transition. And I hope that you feel empowered to take action on, because there really are things you can do. You don't have to feel helpless. And there are lots of groups that can support your involvement right here in the Evansville area. I bet you didn't expect to see him today. This is our former Vice President, Dick Cheney. And in 2001, when George W. Bush was elected president, Dick Cheney had a sort of a secretive energy task force. And he inspired the Sierra Club's Beyond Coal campaign, because when his energy task force released their report, they said, this is what we're going to do. We're going to build 200 new coal plants. And of course, a lot of environmental organizations, including Sierra Club, were alarmed. started to get involved, and were ultimately able to defeat almost all of those proposed plants. Only a couple of them got built. One of them is Duke Energy's Edwardsport plant in Indiana, but for the most part, they were all defeated. And then after that, Beyond Coal decided to take a look at existing coal plants, and in 2010 created the Beyond Coal campaign with the goal of retiring all coal by 2030, and now the goal is also all renewable energy economy by 2050. And what that means is, beyond how we're powering our homes, the gas in our homes, gas stoves, gas furnaces, fossil fuels and transportation, decarbonizing industry. So by 2050, everything electrified and running on renewable energy. That's the idea, and that's the goal. And in terms of the Beyond Coal work and the coal plants that I've been working on for the last 8 years with our teams, with our local teams throughout the state, the local team here is called the Ohio River Valley Beyond Coal team that has worked on plants throughout the Evansville area. The way that this campaign works is, we call it, nationally, we call it a top-down, bottom-up campaign. So we have, our federal team that's working on supporting regulations and laws that put pressure on the utilities and the coal plants from above. And we also have our grassroots teams, local people, our members, who are customers of these different utilities. Locally here it's Vectren / now it's CenterPoint, who are working on the campaigns, getting city leaders involved. We do legal interventions. I'm gonna talk a little bit about the CenterPoint campaign because I think it's just a great example. I could pick many examples of utility campaigns in Indiana, but I think CenterPoint is a pretty great example of how we work, and I'm gonna give you more of the specific details of how the campaign has worked in a bit. But this is the wedge slide, which I have watched evolve over the years working for Beyond Coal. But if you look at the x-axis, you can see that's years leading up to 2030, which is the time by which we want to have all coal out of the electric sector. And on the y-axis, we have megawatts of coal. And what this represents is actually the dark blue. Everything from about, this slide is about a year old, so it's a little out of date, but everything that's retired or proposed to retire by 2030 in terms of coal, and then what's remaining. So as you can see, about 2/3 of the plants that were online in 2009 have been retired or are proposed to retire. We have now retired, along with our allies, 372 coal plants, and I think there are about 159 remaining. And you can see the kind of precision and strategy that Beyond Coal's focus is so specific, and that's one of the things that has always appealed to me about it. I know the name of that coal plant. I know how many megawatts it has. I know about its coal ash pits. I've knocked the doors of the people who live across the street. We've gotten very involved. We've held hearings on sulfur dioxide emission, really throwing every tool you have at the coal plant to try to ensure that it's replaced with clean energy. Indiana is a coal state. It's one of the largest producers of coal. It's one of the largest consumers of coal. We have more super polluter coal plants, the biggest and dirtiest coal plants in the country, than anywhere else. And 4 of those are within 30 miles of Evansville. We'll talk about that more. And we're usually at the bottom of every list having to do with environmental quality. And while that's not all about coal, a lot of it is. I think most people will associate air pollution with coal, but it's also a significant contributor to water pollution. We have more coal ash pits where they dump the waste from the burning of coal into pits at the site of the coal plant. Every coal plant has a dirty little secret, we like to say, and it's the coal ash pit that's sitting in the groundwater and contaminating the groundwater. In addition to the mercury and other toxins it's putting in the river. In our case, the Ohio River, but also the Wabash, also the White, rivers throughout the state. I remember when our former governor, Mitch Daniels, who's now the president of Purdue University, came to Evansville several years ago, he called this region the Saudi Arabia of coal. So I had been working for Beyond Coal for a little less than a year when I got a call from a reporter with the Center for Public Integrity, which is a nonprofit journalistic enterprise. And she said she'd been looking at these two EPA databases. One was the Toxic Release Inventory, and anyone can access this data by going online and see what the polluters are in your area. One was toxic release, one was carbon emissions. She'd taken these two databases and crossed them, and she'd come up with the 22 coal plants that release the most toxics and the most carbon emissions throughout the country. She said more of those than any place else, 5 are in Indiana, and 4 are within 30 miles of you. And I knew, what had drawn me to this work was that we had a lot of coal plants around. Those 4, Petersburg, Gibson, Rockport, and Warwick, are just the super polluters. A.B. Brown and Cully are just center points. There's more than that. But I had never heard it articulated in quite that way. And that was eye-opening, even for someone like me who was so focused on the issue.
Is one of those Alcoa?
Yes, Warwick. Yeah, so Duke, Gibson, AES Indiana is Petersburg. That's the one you see when you go up 69. Rockport, if you're headed toward Owensboro or in that direction, you're going to see Rockport. And then Warwick and Cully are co-located there on the Newburgh riverfront. Warwick powers an aluminum smelter, and an important thing to know, and that I was going to tell you on this slide, is that most of that power is exported far away from here. We get the pollution, the power's going, in the case of Gibson, Duke Energy powers communities throughout the state. Petersburg entirely powers Indianapolis. Rockport, far north Indiana and Michigan. Warwick, primarily the aluminum smelter, although a small fraction of that also currently powers CenterPoint customers. However, CenterPoint is ending its cooperation agreement with the Warwick super polluter next year. And so we're not entirely certain what will happen there, but we get the pollution, the power's going elsewhere. And so we really ran with this. For one, it was a partnership with the Weather Channel and USA Today, so it was on the front page of newspapers across the country. And we had been really fighting for any acknowledgement from public officials about the issues with air pollution from coal plants in this community. No one would say a word about it. But this story couldn't be ignored. It was just too big. It was on the front of the Evansville Courier, as well as, as I said, all across the country. There's also an accompanying interactive website at superpolluters.com that has a video that team did as well. And it really did break the silence on coal, which was exactly what we were trying to do. And in fact, we had just held an event by that name not long before this story broke. And I'm going to show you this video we made. What we did was we brought Sierra Club members who are customers of these coal plants in Southwest Indiana and took them on a tour of the super polluters to meet people who are impacted by the pollution from those coal plants and just see their coal plants, see what's providing them energy. So let's see how this goes.
You see it dumped in open pits and
Can you hear it?
out of the ground.
Usually you move to the country, you have nice air.
Well, it's disgusting.
It's our health, that's all it's about. People just think air pollution is something that's ugly and smelly, but the truth is it's something that's deadly.
There are 22 super polluters in the whole country, and 5 of them are here in Indiana alone, 4 of them in this 30-mile radius of Evansville that they locally call the sacrifice zone.
A super polluter is basically a class of the worst offenders in the nation of power plants that release both the worst toxic air emissions and greenhouse gases.
Just in this particular area, the concentration of super polluter plants is really unparalleled anywhere in the US. And so what does that mean? Well, it means that we have a higher incidence of things like asthma, heart disease, lung cancer, and other cancers as well.
I see an increased risk for prematurity, for developmental delays, for autism, for learning problems, for asthma, for respiratory disease.
My students know that we live within 30 miles of 7 coal-fired power plants. What they don't know is that this is weird, right? They don't know other kids don't line up for inhalers before recess.
Spencer County is 23rd out of over 3,000 counties in the United States for toxic release, and the state of Indiana is 6th for toxic release per square mile.
I live north of Fort Wayne, Indiana, 347 miles from here at Rockport, and this is where our power is generated. I leave my light on for my children at night so they can find the restroom, and a child in southern Indiana is potentially having an asthma attack because of my consumption.
I definitely think that young people will leave the state or have left the state because of the pollution here.
I'm a student at USI, and currently I'm not sure after I graduate whether I want to stay or not due to the sheer amount of pollution.
40 years ago, we put all these power plants in and we didn't have much choice, but today, right now, I mean, it's time to shift to renewable energy.
We're standing in front of our pole barn that has 50 solar panels on it, and from that array we produce all the energy that we use in our home and in the barn itself. We live in a subdivision out here, and we have 14 homes in the subdivision, and 4 of these homes have solar on them.
Clean energy would bring a better environment to Indiana by not having as much air pollution, or air quality would improve. There'd be more opportunities for innovation. People could take control of their own energy use.
I always have a lot of hope for Indiana, and the more I see people joining us, the more hope I have for this state.
I think people are beginning to wake up to the fact the utilities are directing the legislature and they're directing the governor's office.
Open your eyes and your ears, IPL. Legislators need to open their eyes and ears too.
People have a vision of a cleaner Indiana, a healthier Indiana for our families, and they're going to start rising up and saying we want to repower Indiana. We're tired of the old way of doing things, and we demand a better quality of life. So we made this video in 2018, and at that time, none of those coal plants were scheduled for retirement. That is no longer the case. Oh, this is what I told her I was afraid was going to happen. And it didn't happen when I was testing it. I always have trouble getting to the next one. I got it. Thank you. So I just want to tell you a little bit about Indiana Beyond Coal specifically. We started out in Indianapolis, hiring our first organizer there in 2012, focused on the Harding Street coal plant in Indianapolis. And the hook there really was that it was the worst polluter in Marion County, where Indianapolis is located. Organizer worked there to get the city council involved, created really a huge coalition of folks who were concerned about the air pollution. And the city council was poised to pass a resolution calling on the utility up there at the time, it was Indianapolis Power and Light, to retire the coal plant. And just before they were going to pass the resolution, the utility decided to announce it on their own terms, that they were going to retire the coal plant. So that was announced in 2014, and that was the first campaign. Meanwhile, I was here working at USI going, what is Beyond Coal doing up there in Indianapolis? We have all the big coal plants down here. But they are actually, they're very strategic and specific about how they decide what coal plants to target and when, and they saw vulnerability at Harding Street, and that's where they started. But soon after, they hired a terrific organizer, Robin Skaya-Boss, who's worked with Dr. Mary Lynn Stoll for years, and others, building a terrific team here in Vectren/Centerpoint service territory. So yeah, since 2015, we've gone through 3 20-year energy planning processes with Centerpoint. We've gone through 2 proposals for gas plants. And not to belabor the campaign, but in 2016, just after Donald Trump had been elected president, which made me worry about whether their plans would be in doubt, they did announce all but 1 of their coal units. But at that time, they proposed to build an 850 megawatt gas plant that actually would have increased their reliance on fossil fuels. We were able to actually defeat that gas plant proposal. And I think it was because there was just such a diverse and strong coalition, including the coal industry, that was opposed to building this giant gas plant. We turned out the hearing for this was actually here on the USI campus in the new-ish theater. It was a full house. People universally opposed that plant. It was historic because it was the first time the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission had turned down a utility request. This is a state where the utilities have a ton of power. We've learned they have more power than the coal industry. They do what they want. So it was historic that that gas plant got denied. And the next time that CenterPoint had a 20-year energy planning process, they proposed more renewable energy and less gas, a smaller gas plant they still plan to build here at the site of the A.B. Brown coal plant, which, as I told you, will retire by the end of the year. This time around, we got the city council involved. They passed a resolution in support of clean energy from CenterPoint. And ultimately, CenterPoint did cite customer demand for clean energy when they announced their coal plant retirements. And in this third 20-year energy planning process in this past year, they announced their last remaining coal unit to be retired before 2030. That was Cully 3, Cully 2. Mary Lynn?
Sorry.
Doesn't matter. One of the Cully units down by Alcoa, and it was the 372nd coal plant of the Beyond Coal campaign to be retired. And the reason I went into that kind of detail about it is that if we had just, if folks hadn't risen up and opposed that gas plant, that's what they would be building at that site, and they would be more reliant on fossil fuels today than they weren't otherwise. So that kind of engagement is really, really powerful and has been really powerful in that amount of time. And we've also had a lot of success around retiring super polluter coal plants and units. The fifth super polluter is located up in northwest Indiana. It's owned by NIPSCO. It was fully announced all of their coal plants will be retired and replaced almost entirely with renewable energy. Rockport, Unit 1 was the largest single coal unit in Beyond Coal campaign history when it was announced. Both units at Rockport will be fully retired by 2028. That was the first Evansville area super polluter to be announced entirely for retirement. And that was a really meaningful moment for me as someone who lives here and is raising a child who's impacted by pollution from these coal plants. Also, AES Indiana, which has the Petersburg super polluter, no more coal burning there by 2025. So now 2 of the 4 totally retired by 2028. And then Gibson, we're still working on Duke Energy. It's the worst, not only in the state, but nationally in terms of their reluctance to transition away. I am, as you heard, moving on from Sierra Club, and I'm sorry I won't be able to continue to engage on Duke, but because they are the worst. But we do have 3 of the 5 units at the Gibson's super polluter currently scheduled for retirement. So if you would like to get involved here locally, there's still a lot of work to do. It's an amazing team with a great depth of knowledge, and I will put this slide up again later if you want to scan it, or if you want to scan it now, please do, and I'm gonna, thank you. Yeah, I think that you could do to take on this challenge would be to organize to reduce USI's carbon footprint. I mentioned that I served on the Environmental Stewardship Committee for the university in the past. We didn't have a lot of interest from the administration at that time to do very much around, energy efficiency. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit on a university campus. But now, because of the Inflation Reduction Act that has so many different programs related to incentives for renewable energy, some of those are specifically for universities and other entities like churches and co-ops, etc., that haven't been able to take advantage of tax credits in the past because they don't pay taxes in the ways that some of us do. But now there are direct pays for some of these entities to build renewable energy. This is a really, really important time that the university could be taking advantage of, and there's money on the table for universities to do such a thing. So recently, Indiana University, just this year, produced their first climate action plan. That would be a specific ask that students and faculty and staff could make of the administration. create a climate action plan, look at what sort of incentives are available through the IRA. I was able to find, this isn't my area of expertise, but I was able to find a webinar for universities that talks about ways in which they could take advantage of the IRA. So if that's something that you're interested in, you can reach out to me and I can get you that link and try to, put you together with people who are deep in the weeds on the IRA, because there's billions and billions of dollars available. Some of these funds are unlimited for how much is available, but there are certain requirements, and so that's something the university would need to look at. So that's another idea. And lastly, you can reduce your own carbon footprint, and this may be a concept that you're familiar with, but I didn't want to assume that. But basically, it's how you are conducting your life and what the impact of that is in terms of carbon emissions. How you eat, obviously being a vegetarian, I'm sure that's something they're talking about there over at the vegetarian club table. Being a vegetarian or a vegan reduces your carbon footprint. How you get around, what you use for transportation, how much you're buying generally, where your power comes from, obviously. So those are all the things. And if you would like to calculate that, there are ways to do so. Here's just a variety of carbon footprint calculators you could look at. If you wanted to take on this challenge, you could do that and then say, well, I would like to reduce my carbon footprint by X amount. You decide how you want to take that challenge on. But yeah, so that's what I have. Again, get involved with either Beyond Coal or one of the other organizations here. There are also other environmental organizations in town. There's a Citizens Climate Lobby. There's the Tri-State Creation Care and other orgs. Ohio River Beyond Coal, you can either use that link or scan that volunteer sign up. I really would urge you to ask the administration to look at creating a climate action plan. That could be super impactful, or just work on your own individual footprint. And with that, has anyone got any questions? Yes, sir.
So with retiring the coal plants at this rate, I assume that most of this is being replaced by natural gas.
Not necessarily.
How about this as a question?
Sure.
What percent is natural gas and renewables replacing what's coming offline?
That information is available. I can't give it to you. I haven't determined that in terms of all the utilities, but every one of the investor-owned utilities has what's called an integrated resource plan. I've been calling it the energy plan because I try to avoid using the wonky language when I'm talking to general audiences, but they're all online at the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission website. You can see how that's all breaking down. I will say, like, at the beginning of the Beyond Coal campaign, there was so much excess coal capacity on the grid that you could call on utilities just to retire coal plants without replacement. But it's been as a campaign, it's been so successful that now there have to be replacement resources. There's a certain amount of replacement capacity and a certain amount of capacity they just have to have by law to ensure reliability for good reasons, right? I can say that I know that CenterPoint has more renewables and less gas than they would have otherwise if they had done as they pleased. Rockport, Indiana Michigan Power actually owns a nuclear power plant. So some of that is they're going to run their nuclear power plant a little longer, they've said. NIPSCO initially announced that they were going to replace all of their coal with renewable energy. They recently are filing to build a couple of what we call gas peakers, which are smaller gas plants. In fact, that's what CenterPoint will be building over at A.B. Brown. The idea is there are problems, as we discussed earlier at your table, in getting renewable energy built. A lot of it is that in Indiana, a lot of counties have just zoned it out. It's a real problem because we have